they wanted to pretty much lock me up and throw away the key. But thank God, God had other plans for me and for my family. And I remember, when I first got in there, I remember reaching out, trying to stay in contact with people, and it's like what they say, right? Out of sight, out of mind, right? But here it is, Liana. She's coming to visit me. She's the first one. She's writing me, and I remember about 8 months in, I was thinking, man, this crazy girl really loves me. I don't know what it is, but she really cares about me. During sentence, I asked the judge if he would allow me to get married, and he granted it. And so, me and my wife, we were blessed with the privilege to be able to be married right there in the beautiful San Luis Obispo County Jail behind glass. And that's really when our journey began.
So I was a new bride, and I just had my dream wedding at the county jail. And 3 weeks later, Marcus got moved from the county jail. The next time I would see him would be at a prison about 8 hours south of here called Centinela. One question I get asked often is, how did you wait so long for him? And the answer is one day at a time. So fast forward about 5 years, Marcus got moved to CMC back here in San Luis Obispo County, and we were elated. We would finally get to see him on a regular basis, and we did. Adriana and I went to visit every single weekend, and we were more invested in each other's lives than ever before. But then I found out that Marcus was making some choices that I felt were jeopardizing our family and what we had going on, and I asked him to stop, but he wouldn't listen to my pleas. And at that point, I became acutely aware that without a miracle, our marriage was going to fail. So I turned to God, the only one I knew could help. I returned to church and recommitted my life to Jesus.
At this time during this time in my term, I was involved in some things that I shouldn't have been involved with. And it wasn't too long after she recommitted her life to God that I got in trouble. They took me to the hole. And honestly, I'm thinking, worst case scenario, I'm going to do a year in the hole and they'll kick me out, send me to another prison. No big deal. But it didn't work out that way. The district attorney ended up picking up the case. And they want to give me a minimum of 2 years to a maximum of 6 years on top of my term. And so, I'm in a desperate place. I started thinking about my wife, and I'm thinking, how am I going to explain to my wife who's been waiting, babe, you might have to, I'm going to get some more time in. You don't have to wait. Or how am I going to tell my daughter who's been coming to see me and waiting for me, like, hey, daddy's not coming home on his date. And I'm like, just the thought of that wrecked me inside. And I remember crying out to God. And I said, Lord, work with me, I try to will and deal with God, like, man, I'll be the man that you call me to be. I remember getting in the Word, and I was in the hole, I'm getting in the Word, and I'm praying, and I began to trust and have faith in God. And I said, you know what, I remember fasting, and really, really crying out to God, and it got to a point where I had this trust and faith in God. And I said, man, you know what, God got this, He hears it. And so it ends up, I go back to court, and they ended up adding an additional 2 years on top of my term. And that really wrecked me inside. I got angry. I'm like, what kind of God is this that, supposedly He hears us? I told him, man, just don't, how are you going to do this to a faithful follower of yours? My wife, she's been a faithful follower of yours, and to an innocent child. And I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm done with God. I hardened my heart, I put a rock around my heart, and I became atheist.
By the time all this happened, it was mid-2007, and Marcus had been incarcerated for 9 years. I had been counting down the years. We only had 2 years left, but now we had 4. And on top of it, Marcus had decided that God didn't exist, that the only hope we had for our marriage was a myth. I was crushed, and I fell into a depression for the first time.
My release date was coming up, but I was trying to prepare myself for where I was going. And out of the blue, out of nowhere, unexpected, they called me to parole. Rostro, you're paroling. And I'm thinking, it's not time for parolees, high control parolees, they don't parole on Fridays. And it was a Friday, and it was noon. And any parolee, you parole at 5 o'clock in the morning, they take you early in the morning. And it was noon. I'm like, man, you know, they're probably transferring me to another prison for some other nonsense. So I'm like, okay, well, here we go. And they put me in a cell, and they begin to give me my property and take off my handcuffs, and I'm still like, man, I still didn't understand what was happening. And I remember calling up. Nobody knew I was getting out. My wife didn't know. My mom didn't know. Nobody knew. I didn't know. I call her up and I tell her, you know, I'm out. Could she come pick me up? And she's like, yeah, I'll be right there, you know. So she comes. I remember her pulling up. I was on the corner in San Luis, and she comes and she pulls up. I remember her getting out of the car and we embraced. And I'm thinking, man, you know, we've waited a long time for this moment. And it just didn't feel real. So here it is. I'm out and I'm atheist, and it was all about making decisions. I'm thinking, if I want to get ahead, if I want to do something with my life, it's all about making good choices. You know, as long as I work hard and I hustle, I'm gonna get the things that I need and provide for my family. But you know, it didn't take long before I started going back to my old ways. It didn't take long before I started drinking again, and really making some poor choices.
So Marcus came home after being away for 13 years. It was the highest point in our marriage, the moment we had spent our whole married life waiting for. We finally got to be together all the time. But like Marcus said, not too long after he came home, he started drinking, and things quickly went downhill. My greatest joy soon became my greatest source of pain. Everything I had waited for and hoped for and dreamed about came crashing down around me, and I once again felt like that desperately insecure girl who was tremendously unsure of herself. I was consumed with anxiety, panic often filled me, and depression again became my companion. 13 months after Marcus came home, I was ready to end it. I wanted the pain to stop and my struggle to be over. But God again intervened, and by His grace and strength alone, we chose to stay married. After that, things improved, but the drinking didn't stop. It was such a hard season. Even with the joy of the birth of our son, Rostro, there was still a dark cloud over our marriage. I loved Marcus, and I was willing to do anything for him. I prayed that God would do whatever it took for him to come into a saving relationship with him. I prayed that I would be able to love him without condition, that through me, he would know that he is worthy of a sacrificial love. But I also felt trapped in this commitment that I had made. In many ways, I did what I did because I felt like I had to. I felt God had called me to it and required it of me, that I had to give and He got to take. And I felt so abandoned and unloved and unwanted, and resentment began to take root toward Marcus, but underneath it toward God. I didn't understand why Marcus got to have what I always wanted, to be loved wholly and at any cost, while I was in agony with a shattered heart, compelled to stay and extend forgiveness.
And I remember coming home from work. You know, I had a disagreement with somebody at work, and I remember I was a little angry, and I left early, and I stopped at the liquor store, got a couple little shots, and just calm the nerves. And I'm thinking, you know what, we have some work to do at home. When I get home, my wife's gonna be there, and she's gonna be happy because we're gonna be able to take care of the stuff that we're supposed to be taking care of at the house. And I get there, and as soon as I walk in, my wife's like, "You're drunk already?" And I'm like, "Man, what are we talking about?" You know? And so then here we go. We start arguing. She starts accusing me of being drunk. I'm like, I'm not drunk, and then I just get to a point where I shut down, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just waiting for her to finish so I can go get drunk and show her what getting drunk is, you know. And so she left the house to go get my daughter, and as soon as she left, I took off. I went to the liquor store, got me something to drink, and I got wasted. Next thing I know, I wake up and I'm in my bed. I'm in my bed and I'm thinking about like what just happened? And I hear my wife come in, my daughter, and she comes into the room, and she comes in and she comes to me, she says, babe, she's like, I got you some food. Are you okay? I said, yeah. She's like, I got you some food. If you're hungry, we're in the kitchen. And I'm like, man, what is this woman still doing here? Why does she continue to love me? Why does she continue to have forgiveness for me and grace for me? And that's when it hit me. God touched my heart through my wife. You know, he was using her as a reflection of his love for me. Unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness. And that rock that I had around my heart, it melted. God melted it away. And you know, I believe that God used my wife to transform my life. You know, and I believe that God honored that prayer that she prayed. And you know, it's only through the power of God, you know, that we're here today, 20 years down the line.
Since that day, Marcus has been a totally different man, the one I had always hoped he would be. I attest to you that he did change that very day. But by then, my heart was hardened and animosity had made its home. It's been 4 years since Marcus surrendered his life to Jesus, and many days I still wrestle with the past hurts. I regularly express bitterness and anger and hostility, and I can be downright impossible. But Marcus is loving and long-fused and far more gracious than I deserve. And we are learning together what life looks like on this side of all the brokenness we've experienced. As we prepared to share this story with you, I struggled to see a story marked with much more than pain. And I put it off for weeks because I didn't want to tell such a story. But I prayed for fresh eyes, and as we started writing it down, I've been able to see God's faithfulness to us all throughout our lives and our love story. You know, we live in a culture that tells us that love stories are supposed to be grand and romantic and the stuff that movies are made out of. In most ways, our love story is the direct opposite of that. But real love isn't birthed out of romance and flowers. Marriages don't last because of grand gestures. Love stories are sweetest when they are lathered with forgiveness. Marriages last because two people continuously choose to love and forgive and honor each other. As we sit here and reflect back on our 20 years of marriage and renew our commitment to each other, I am convinced that God will continue to be faithful to us. And even in this very moment, he is doing his healing work. We choose you.
And as I'm faithful to my commitment to him, he is faithful to heal my marriage. And when I turned my back on God and denied his very existence, he remained faithful to me through my wife. When Liana is filled with doubt and fear, God faithfully stays by her side. When we are faithful, he is more faithful. And when we are faithless, he is faithful still.